Today we talk about Boots on the Ground by Worthington Games. This is a game of modern tactical combat set in an urban area, and it pits an allied side representing US units and unspecified allies of the US against an equally unspecified insurgent side. And from the art on the counters you can tell that this insurgent side represents some generic group of Middle Eastern fighters, terrorists. So the game is not trying to depict a specific event. It clearly does reflect contemporary and recent events, but we don't know where exactly and when this is happening. It doesn't really represent a specific event, and I really believe that in this way the designer was trying to avoid becoming too political or too controversial. At the same time, this idea of keeping things vague as a generic struggle between allies and insurgents allowed him to take a couple of liberties when it comes to realism, but we'll talk about this more later. What really made me curious about this game was learning that the game can be played in 4 different ways. It can be played as a solitaire, with the player being the allied side and using a deck of cards to govern the actions of the insurgent AI. It can be played cooperatively with 2 players using a team of allied soldiers each and trying to achieve a common goal against the insurgent AI. It can be played competitively, same situation, 2 players, a team of allied soldiers each, insurgent AI, but now the 2 teams are racing to complete the objective of the mission of the scenario before that the team does. And it can be played versus, that is, a player will be the insurgent side and then you have 1 or 2 players representing the allied side. So it's a pretty ambitious project, this idea of getting 4 games in 1 game. And if it works, well, it really makes buying this game a great investment. You get 4 games just by buying one. At the same time, it's pretty ambitious, and who knows, do all modes play equally well? Are some more interesting, some more successful, some get to really achieve what they're trying to do better than other ones? Well, now we're going to take a look at the game in general, and at the end of this review we'll get back to this point. Let's have a look at the type of units that you have in this game. Of course, you have units representing allied soldiers, and you have 2 teams. You have the Alpha team and the Bravo team, and you can have a player playing both or a player playing with only one. You can have a solitaire player using one or both. There's a lot of flexibility in the way the teams are selected. Then you have units representing the insurgents, and these units, of course, belong to the insurgent player or the insurgent AI. The ally player can activate his units in one of 2 ways. The first way is to activate units as a group. To do that, the units of the group need to be adjacent to one another at the beginning of movement. In this case, the ally player would be able to activate these 3 units as a group, but not this one because, of course, it is not adjacent to anybody. When you activate units as part of a group, you basically ignore everything that is written on them. You ignore the name of the specialist, and you ignore these small numbers here, which, by the way, for future reference are the one on the left of the arrow is the fire modifier, the other one is the movement allowance. You ignore all this. All units that are activated as part of a team have a fire modifier of 0 and a movement allowance of 3. Also, specialists, which are the ones with this special name here, the non-GIs, cannot use their special ability when they're activated as part of a team. In alternative, you can activate units as individuals. When you do that, you can activate only 1 unit before the game goes to the insurgent player. On the other hand, the advantage is that when you activate an individual, then you can use the factors that are printed on the counter of that unit, and also you can use the special abilities of the specialists. Units can fire and then move, or move and then fire, or they can move for part of the movement allowance, then fire, and then complete their movement up to their movement allowance. While they're moving, units do not need to worry about their facing, which is represented by that arrow. They can change it at will, but they do have to commit to a facing once they complete their movement, and they cannot change their facing until the next time that they are activated. These are the 6 specialists, and usually in order to use the special ability of a specialist, you need to activate that unit as an individual. The leader is an exception because when activated as part of a team, he gives a +1 defense modifier to adjacent units. The medic, when activated as part of a team, can heal himself, but when activated as an individual, can heal an adjacent unit. The sniper has a particularly long range. When using the special ability, he can fire up to 10 squares away. The usual range is 5. Also, if he's firing at a range between 6 and 10, he has a +1 modifier to the die roll to attack. Heavy Weapon Expert can fire at one unit using a +2 modifier, or can roll the die once with 0 modifier but apply that result to up to 3 enemy insurgents that are, of course, in range, and he has a line of sight on. His scout is not much of a fighter. He has a -2 modifier when he fires. He can move up to 7 squares though, so he's pretty fast. Also, his special ability is to reveal the next card in the insurgent deck, and the units of the insurgent that are affected by that card, so new units that are added because of that card, units that move because of that card, well, those units cannot fire for that turn. So that's good defensive ability he has. The Demolition Expert is a totally cool unit. He has 3 abilities. He can create a door by blasting a hole through a wall, or he can throw a grenade. The unit in the square where the grenade lands is killed automatically, and all units adjacent to that square are wounded. Or the Demolition Expert can fire the RPG. The RPG must be fired at a wall. The RPG will kill an enemy unit which is behind the wall, where the wall is hit by the RPG, and also will wound up to 3 units that are on the same side of the wall where the RPG hit. After a team has completed the activation of an individual or of a group of units, then it is the Insurgent's turn. The Insurgent starts his turn, if that is a human player, or its turn, if that is the AI, by drawing a card from this deck and resolving the text of that card against the team that just moved, that was just activated. And let's look at some of these cards. It may be that the ally player of that team is lucky and the Insurgents take cover, don't move and don't fire for that turn, so there's a turn of break. New Insurgents may enter the game and start firing against the ally team. It may be that an insurgent unit will acquire special abilities for a turn. For example, in this case, an insurgent unit becomes the heavy weapon expert. It may be even worse that an insurgent unit acquires a special ability like becoming a sniper for the rest of the game. That's bad. Insurgents may move, a certain number of insurgents may move against the team that just went. For example, here would be 4 insurgents. They move 5 spaces each, so actually they're pretty fast. It may be a random event like the closest door explodes, and that would wound all allied units that are adjacent to the exploding door. So usually it is bad stuff. There are some cards that are good, but usually it is bad stuff. After the insurgent has resolved the text of the card, then the insurgent may fire with all of his units which are in range and in the right position with line of sight to fire against allied units of the team that was just activated. Basically, it means insurgents that were already in a position to fire before the card was drawn. When a unit fires at another unit, both the attacker and the defender will roll a 6-sided die. And that die roll can be modified by several factors. For example, it can be modified by the angle at which a unit is firing at another one. If you're firing at a unit through the flank, then you get a +1. If you're firing at a unit through that unit's rear, then you get a +3. Remember, specialists activated as individuals use their printed modifier instead of the standard 0. In this case, a leader would be able to use a +1. The defender can use, there are less modifiers for the defender. An allied defender could use a +1 defender in case he is adjacent to a leader that has been activated as part of a team, and both the allied and the insurgent get a +1 defensive modifier if they're fired at through an adjacent vehicle. Then you subtract the modified die roll of the defender from the modified die roll of the attacker, and depending on the player that is firing, then you find the result on this table. For example, the LA player with a differential of +2 or more will kill the target. That means that the insurgent that is killed is removed from the game and cannot return later. The ally that ties or has a +1 will wound the target. That means that the insurgent is removed from the game but can return later if a card effect allows it. An ally that has a differential of -1 to -3 misses, and -4, that unit is wounded by a return fire. The insurgent needs a +4 or more to kill an allied unit, +1 to +3 to wound. So actually, as you can see, it is worse because the allied player can wound on a tie. The insurgent needs a +1 at least. On a tie to -2, the insurgent misses, and on -3 or more, the insurgent unit is wounded by return fire. An allied unit that receives a hit for the first time is flipped to its wounded side. If that unit receives another hit before getting a chance to be healed by the medic, then that unit receives a wounded marker. If that unit with a wounded marker takes another hit, then it is removed from the game. Not everybody that I played the game with enjoyed it, and a major problem that some people have been complaining about is the lack of realism. Mainly the fact that the game has no opportunity fire or zones of control, which really means that your units are completely clueless and powerless when they're not activated. It is not your turn to activate a unit, then you may have an enemy that runs right in front of it, runs around it, and fires at your unit in the back, and your unit has been there, maybe in the middle of an empty room, in the middle of the street, doing absolutely nothing, completely incapable of reacting to that. And that has irritated several people that I played it with, either because of lack of realism or because they hadn't realized that opportunity at the beginning and I would just keep it fire at them, and they didn't like that. But personally, I do not require the same degree of realism from every game that I play. If there is a game that sacrifices some realism in order to give me something else, for example, ease of play and fast-paced, non-stop action, so like over-the-top Hollywood movie, then I think that I'm still enjoying the game and still like the game. As long as the game is fun, I don't require every game to be a simulation. I can suspend the disbelief. Not everybody can, and not everybody likes to do that. Talking about the 4 modes, I think they all work fairly well, but there are a couple of things here and there that I think need to be addressed in a review. First, the AI does require some work in order to act effectively. You have solitaire games in which the AI is very well structured. You really are just thinking as your own side, and then you execute the actions of the AI. The board takes care of everything. Here, the cards give pretty generic instructions. You still have to think as the insurgent in order to make the insurgent units as nasty, evil, and dangerous as possible. Because if you didn't do that, of course, that there is no fun in fighting against them. So you still have to switch perspective from your own to that of the insurgent, your own that an insurgent, so sometimes the game feels more like a two-player game that you're playing by yourself as a solitaire, rather than a game of those games that have been originally designed as solitaire games. Another thing is that in solitaire games you want the AI to be stronger than you are, to present a real challenge. If you win too often in a solitaire game, then you just lose interest. And it works that this way here. As a solitaire, it's kind of hard to win by using the allied side, but that also means that when you're playing the versus version, in which there is a player that takes the role of the insurgent, well, that player seems to have quite an advantage. In fact, in the games that we played, it was very hard for the allies to win. It was possible, but I believe that you do need to give the role of the allies to more experienced players, and you give that a role to less experienced or to a sore loser, and he or she will be happy. Overall, I still enjoyed this game. I still believe that it's good to have different modes to switch from, different scenarios to try. I like the fast-paced, non-stop, over-the-top action. We start to blow up everything everywhere and just continuous fighting. It is not a simulation by any means, but it's a fun ride and I enjoyed playing it.